Early onset Alzheimer's disease is the topic that I will be discussing today. What is early onset Alzheimer's disease? Well, it's an autosomal dominant inheritance disorder. It's passed down from generations. It's otherwise known as familial Alzheimer's disease. It is a rare and uncommon form of Alzheimer's disease, affecting ages 30s to their mid-60s. Early onset Alzheimer's disease is found in all ethnic groups. It affects males and females equally. The frequency is 1 in 10,000, and it affects approximately 200,000 individuals in the USA. It represents less than 10% of the population. It can be very devastating to a family. Now that we know what early onset Alzheimer's disease is, let's take a moment to think about what this individual will look like. What is their phenotype? Well, it's an individual who's of young age, ranging from ages 30 to their mid-60s. More than 1/3 develop language and visuospatial impairment. When we think about the language impairment, it's basically the issues surrounding word finding. They have false starts, they have issues with repetition, and they're unable to repeat long sentences. As far as the visuospatial impairment, it's basically they have issues with telling where objects are in space and how far objects are apart from each other. The MRI shows posterior cortical atrophy, and the typical neurofibers, tangles, and amyloid plaques are found in the brain. With this specific type of Alzheimer's, the memory is relatively spared. As with late onset Alzheimer's, which what we most typically know about, they have issues with atrophy in the temporal region. Genetic mechanisms for early onset Alzheimer's disease. There are 4 Alzheimer's gene mutations that are inherited. They include amyloid precursor protein, preselin 1, preselin 2, and APOE4. A mutation of amyloid precursor protein, APP, is the first gene mutation that was found back in 1987 to be inherited. This leads to toxic levels of amyloid peptides in the brain, forming plaques, causing death of the neurons in the brain. It is found on the long arm of chromosome 21. There are more than 50 different mutations. The second gene mutation was found in 1992, which is known as preselin 1, found on chromosome 14, which is the most common cause of early onset Alzheimer's. There are more than 150 of these identified. The third gene mutation, found in 1993, which is known as preselin 2, found on chromosome 1. There are at least 11 mutations of this gene which causes early onset Alzheimer's disease. APO34, discovered in 1993, is known to have the highest increased risk of having early onset Alzheimer's disease. It is found on chromosome 19. But it's important to keep in mind that having these gene mutations doesn't mean that every individual will have this disorder. However, they may develop early onset Alzheimer's before age 65. Sometimes, the cause for this disease may be unknown as well, and that's what is so troublesome about it. This slide represents a continuation of the genetic mechanisms, but it's basically showing the diagrams that represent the chromosomes. In chromosome 21, APP, that's the amyloid precursor protein, and we all learned that chromosome 21 is affiliated with Down syndrome, and hence that shows us the connection between why some people with Down syndrome have Alzheimer's disease. The next one is chromosome 14, which is affiliated with preselin 1, and the following is chromosome 1, which is affiliated with preselin 2. And finally, the last one, chromosome 19, is associated with APOE4, which is the one that's noted to have the highest risk of an individual who has this particular chromosome is likely to be presented with early Alzheimer's disease. Management strategies include medications such as acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, such as donepezil, galantamine, and rivaroxaban, which are the same medications used to treat late onset Alzheimer's. Even though these medications target memory, they can help with posterior cortical atrophy. Some coping strategies include seeking counseling, joining the Alzheimer's Association, and just linking up with families that are suffering through the same process. Additional research is needed, definitely in this case. This is a disease that's rare and uncommon, and definitely additional research is needed. I think basically that the individuals who have been diagnosed with this disorder need to participate in clinical study trials because it's important to find out what can be done to help this individual and people with this disorder. And unfortunately at this time there is no cure. And the same thing with late onset Alzheimer's, there is no cure. But we can always hope that down the line with genetics and genomics that a cure can be found. The ethical, legal, and social implications associated with early onset Alzheimer's disease. The controversy includes the social stigma that's associated with being young and having such a debilitating disorder that's normally associated with the elderly population. Just think about it for a moment and put yourself in that individual's shoes and say, wow, I am between the ages of 30 and mid-60s and I have early Alzheimer's disease. What do I do? Most individuals will become depressed. They're full of disbelief. They can't believe it's happening to them, and they're like questioning to themselves, why me? What have I done to cause this to happen? And they've done absolutely nothing to cause this to happen because sometimes the cause is just unknown. Then we think of how do you support your family if you lose your job? The loss of employment can be devastating to a family, as well as just think about lack of health care. That's another issue that you have to tackle, especially if you are the breadwinner. How do you now support your family? Where do you turn? What do you do? At this point, you say to yourself, you have to get some financial assistance. You need a financial advisor, and you have to get assistance and get your finances in order. One may have to tap into their savings account, their pensions, their IRAs. Let's think about just the lack of health care. That's going to affect the individual who has the disorder and as well as their family, their kids. There's Cobra, of course. You can say, fine, I can go to Cobra, but Cobra is so expensive. How can you afford it now that you have no job? How can you afford to pay for Cobra? There's things like FLMA, family leave. There is ACA, there is Medicare that we can turn to as well. But ACA is very expensive. Medicare, they become eligible for Medicare. The individual may have to use all their savings accounts. They may need to reach out to family members for support, for financial support as well. But it's great that at least now that under Social Security, individuals who are diagnosed with early Alzheimer's disease can get disability. They can get SSDI and SSI that's available to them. This is wonderful. At least now that can alleviate some of the stress associated with this debilitating disorder. Again, hopefully one day there will be a cure for this debilitating disease. We hope and we pray that genetics and genomics can help find a cure.